We'll just start. All right. This is the slowest minute. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Greater Mattapan Candidate Forum for the second Suffolk Senate seat. This evening, we have 4 candidates who are vying for the seat. Candidate Nika, I'm going to read from screen-wise, my left to right, that I look at. Candidate Nika Elugardo, candidate Diane Wilkerson, candidate Rep. Liz Miranda, and candidate Minyard Culpepper. Right now, what we're going to do is time limits. We're going to skipping my opening statement because I'm not going to do anything other than this right now. The opening statements by each candidate are up to 2 minutes each. And the order is going to be flipped by my vice chair, Matthew Skelly. The topics are going to include housing, transportation, public school funding, employment, economic development, environmental protections across the district, and possibly Mass and Cass and Blue Hill Ave. Their answers may be up to 1.5 minutes each. And we ask that any questions that the audience members have, that they place it inside of the chat room. We have an electronic timekeeper, and as well as our wonderful neighbor, Helena, who is our GMNC timekeeper. Thank you, Helena, for waiting. And you will hear the gong will tell you when your time is up. We try not to make it too loud, but you will know when it goes off. So Matthew, if you want to flip a coin and let us know who is going to be first.
I would love it if I had a 4-sided coin. I tore up a Post-it note and shook them up in my hands. So I have the order here. Fatima, as we go through the questions, do we just want to go back and forth, or do you want to do something else? Do you want to go whoever answers first the first question, they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4 down the order? I can keep track of that if you want, so it's not just back and forth.
I think it'd be nice to mix it up so that people don't feel like they're always going to be first, always going to be second.
Yeah, so so we will be starting, and we'll kind of we'll keep a similar order, but we'll just change who goes first every time. So for opening statements, candidate Mr. Culpepper will be up first, and 2 minutes for the opening statement. Is that right, Fatima?
Yes, it is. Is it Culpepper?
Do we have our
first? Yeah.
Do we have our timer working
Thank you.
here?
Yeah.
Helena, is the timer ready? You are on mute.
It's running but not showing. It's weird. I swear, when we let this timer guy sit there and do nothing for a minute, he forgets that he works for us. So if you bear with me, maybe Helena, you can just keep the time and give a shout when it's up as we're getting this fixed for the first couple.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Culpepper, do you may begin?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. My name is Minyard Culpepper. And as most of you know, I'm a candidate for the State Senator in the 2nd Suffolk District. I want to thank the Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council for this opportunity to present to you and discuss the issues that affect in the 2nd Suffolk District. What I'd like for you to know about me is that I'm a lawyer, followed the law, a minister who has worked in the community for many years. I work as a federal housing attorney and serving as a minister in the community have defined my life. I decided to run for office because after a lifetime of working in and on behalf of my community as a pastor, community leader, attorney, and the regional counsel for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, I believe that I have the on-the-ground experience, knowledge, and commitment to be an effective senator for the residents of the 2nd Suffolk District. When it comes to fighting for issues that matters most to our community, from access to affordable housing to increase economic opportunities, creating and equitable public safety system, and ensuring every child has the opportunity to receive a world-class education. I am the candidate with the knowledge and the on-the-ground experience necessary to deliver actual results. If elected, I will take what I have learned from the federal government in Washington and Boston to Beacon Hill and work every day to fight on your behalf, and deliver results for our community. I look forward to the opportunity to speak with all of you tonight and hope to have a chance to earn your support. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Matthew is next.
Helena, you want to give that timer a try while I got, just to see if it'll actually work for us here. I think I can probably do it. Let me just double check. Okay. All right. So next up, we have candidate Ms. L.U. Gardo.
Thank you, Greater Mattapan. Thank you, Fatima and Matthew. My name is Nika Lugardo. I'm a state representative. I represent, for the last 4 years, all of Mission Hill and parts of Jamaica Plain and Rosendale on the Boston side. I also represent currently a little bit of Brookline. And so I've had a lot of diversity in my neighborhoods. I've spent most of my time in the places where people are the most underrepresented. But I make sure that whether you're a homeowner, a landowner, a property owner, or a renter, your voice is front and center in my work in the State House. And that's what's been defining me for these last 4 years, because it's what's been defining me for my entire 30 years doing community and economic development in Boston and beyond. And so I've been an innovator. I've been tapped several times by officials and nonprofits and businesses to launch a couple of statewide programs for a couple of years, a local research program for the community. What I have found in every case is we are very innovative on the ground in our communities. We're investing, but those investments are often taken from us and they're unfairly distributed to places outside of where they're made. And so I went into government because I thought that would be a place where we can change that. But what I discovered is not only can we redistribute resources as a state rep, as a state senator, but we can also bring the leadership of the community right into government. It's a place of incredible creativity, and I've been able to bring out my creative side there as an innovator and as a developer of leaders. I really look forward to talking with you today, continuing conversations we've been having over many months, and to answering the questions that you have so you can understand how to make the best choice on September 6th. But I tell you what, it's a lot of work to vote for me. September 7th will be harder than September 6th. We have a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much, Nika. The next up, Matthew?
Next up is going to be candidate Wilkerson.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Diane Wilkerson. I am a candidate for the State Senate for the 2nd Suffolk District. I am here because I love my community. I was involved with Senator Brownsberger and the community process around redistricting and very much in tune to the redrawing of this district. And most exciting about it is the inclusion or the welcoming back of Mattapan. The mission for the elected official, whether it's the state rep or the state senate, is to make sure that the resources of the district are delivered once we get them to the State House to put them on the ground. And there's been so much talk about all the money that we've received from the federal government, and we have. And in fact, it was sent to the state. I always say I defy anyone to point to Blue Hill Avenue, Warren, Washington, Columbus, and tell me if you see anything that looks like $142 billion has been spent just in the last 2 or 3 years, and I haven't found anyone yet who said I see it. Mattapan is a unique position because of the way that it is dealt with the rest by the rest of the city, and that has always been the case. On the one hand, it's the largest number of Black homeowners in the neighborhood in the city. On the other hand, it is the community that gets the least amount of resources from the city, and I would say, and from the state. All you have to do is look at the budget. I know how to do this. I've done it. We've had some of the most creative and progressive legislation and concepts that came from you and that ended up being adopted because of the connections we were able to make. I look forward to it. I am excited about it, and I thank you for having me here. Thank you. Look forward.
Thank you. And last, but
Great.
of course, never least,
Candidate
Ms.
Miranda.
Thank you.
Good evening, Greater Mattapan. Thank you to the Neighborhood Council for inviting me. It's great to be here with the other candidates. My name is State Representative Liz Miranda. I currently represent the most minority district in the Commonwealth, the 5th Suffolk District. I was a lifelong youth and community organizer, entrepreneur, educator, and nonprofit leader before running for office in 2017 after the death of my youngest brother, Michael. I have been a person in community, for community, with community. In the last 3.5 years, or 3.5 plus years that I've been in the State House, I've led on being the lead author of the police reform bill, particularly around use of force. I worked on maternal and birthing justice, which rates in Mattapan and Hyde Park are the worst in the city. I've worked a lot on environmental justice work because I grew up in the Dudley Triangle community with 1,400 parcels of vacant land and severe disinvestment and redlining from the city, and also ensuring that we're discussing ending mass incarceration. My brothers, my dad were all incarcerated. I understand what family separation is like. The day I walked onto the campus of Wellesley, my father and my oldest brother were deported back to Cape Verde. I'm a proud daughter of 2 Black immigrants who came to this country to find opportunity. And I'm looking forward to having the discussion here tonight with the Greater Mattapan Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's get this party started. Are there any questions within the chat currently?
No, there aren't any questions right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Then the first question, why break tradition, goes to Matthew Skelly.
Sure. We'll start with one that I think everybody will be able to respond to in their own way. And it's going to be 1 minute and 30 seconds on the clock. Do I have that right, Fatima?
Yes, you do.
Great. If elected, what will be your #1 policy priority? And we'll start with candidate Eligardo.
Well, most of my work has been in housing. We've actually got some good traction and some passing of things just recently. And so my #1 priority in the Senate will be economic development. Economic development, of course, intersects with housing and education and jobs, but really I want to make sure that our small business corridors are strong. I want to make sure that when developers come into the community, the voice of the community, neighborhood associations, tenant task forces, even community health centers and Main Streets organization is front and center. So I'd like to bring my organizing background to bear, as I've been doing in this district, to make sure that we're able to amplify our voices. I've already talked with most of the neighborhood association leaders, not only across Mattapan, but all 7 neighborhoods, and the Main Streets directors about what this could look like. And it'll look like whatever you say it looks like. The policies themselves, we need a mechanism for financing. We need a mechanism for holding the Boston residents' jobs policy accountable. And we need a mechanism for making sure that there's both revenue and low-cost mortgages and assistance available, not only for homeowners, but also for people who want to purchase the lands that their businesses are on. When we have corridors where people can come, they can stay out late, they can sit, they can enjoy healthy food, they can enjoy purchasing clothes that are appropriate to the cultures on the street, we're going to see innovation thrive in Boston and lead the nation.
Thank you. Matthew, who's next?
Next up will be candidate Wilkerson.
On Monday evening of this week, I released the 5-year and writing economic reset plan for Black and Latino residents of Boston. And I'm unapologetic and very clear about why. The devastation that has been wreaked upon these communities has been long in the making, 50 years, and in fact, everything that was already, as I say, swirling the drain, worsened post-COVID. That plan, that as we have begun moving around this district and talking with people, and they're so excited about it, as I am as well, involves moving the state legislative policy that will be necessary to realize the goal. Black homeownership, it's a $2 billion fund called the Royal Bowling Senior Homeownership Fund. The Black and Latino Business is Bruce Bowling, Chuck Turner, Black Business Fund, a Health Equities Fund to address some of the many healthcare inequities that have only been exacerbated and really culminated with the actual loss of 3 years in life expectancy by Black men in parts of Roxbury. We have an Eradicate the Gap project that would allow for the total immersion to make up for the 2.5 years that Black and Latino children lost. And then the last is the Virtual Fund, which is actually going to pay $15,000 in payment to every Black resident in the city of Boston.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next up, candidate Miranda.
Thank you. That's a great question. You know, one of the things when you're getting elected into office, sometimes you go into your role thinking you're going to work on one thing, but the world changes every day. And so for those of us that have been in office for the last 3.5+ years, we walked into office thinking we were going to work on certain things, and we got things done. But then was the COVID-19 pandemic. There was the housing and economic crisis, and there was a racial awakening happening in this country that led most of us to work on police reform and the recovery of going through and the revitalization through COVID-19. I think it's a toss-up for me to work on pathways to home ownership and affordable housing and health equity. Our communities are not well. We're dealing with a lot of mental health issues, trauma, maternal morbidity is on the rise, gun violence is on the rise, food insecurity is on the rise. And so for me, although I want to work on the issues, right, that the folks are talking about on the door, I understand that if a community is not safe and healthy, if people are not safe and healthy and feel like they live in a community full of opportunity, the legislation that we pass won't make a big difference in the first 3 to 6 months. And so I want to encourage health equity as leading in intersectional and connecting to working on housing, because that is the #1 issue on every door we knock.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And last up on this will be candidate Culpepper.
Matthew, thank you for that question. And for me, the priority on day one, when I get to the state Senate, is to work on housing issues. I believe that we're in a housing crisis. I believe that with gentrification, the way it's roaring across the community, I believe that housing is a critical issue that we have to deal with now. And I've had 27 years at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, actually housing folks. When you look at Academy Homes, we demolished it, built it up brand new, transferred ownership to the tenants. Canfield Gardens is now Canfield Estates. Demolished it, built it up brand new, transferred ownership to the tenants. When you ride down Seaver Street, the apartments on Seaver Street, HUD renovated them, paid for them, no city funds, no state funds, transferred ownership to the tenants. I think we should do the same thing. And I've got a 3-point housing policy. Number one, if you look at Franklin Field, take something like place like Franklin Field, federal and state, subsidized, renovated, transfer ownership to the tenants. The tenants at Franklin Field need to have some hope. I think the second thing is Section 8. Section 8 certificates are being used in New Hampshire and around the country to buy single-family homes. I think we have a Section 8 home ownership program here in the 2nd Suffolk District in the city of Boston. And the third thing, I think we need to help our young folks coming out of college, do away with that college loan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fatima?
Yes. Moderator, are there questions in the chat?
Yes, we have one for all candidates. The question is, what is your plan for the Mass Cass area?
And who's the first?
First up will be candidate Wilkerson.
Okay.
Councilor, thank you very much for the question. I know Rep. Legarda will share with you, she and I both live literally around the corner. You can see the beginning of MassCast from our homes. First up, an assessment to determine the city of residence for all of the people there before they ended up on MassCast. The second is the creation, which, by the way, more than 70% of them did not have Boston as an address. So for the people who have been saying this is Roxbury's problem, or the South End's problem, not only is that not the case, it's not even just Boston's problem. There are absolutely things we should and must do on the state level to make sure that the state takes responsibility. Second order of business is the disbursement of the delivery of resources, which you can only do when you put people and make cities and towns responsible for literally sending their broken to Boston. And why wouldn't they? The community has been very clear. If you bring to people all of the resources that they need to maintain their pain, there is no reason to leave. You can go into a tent and have a safe and get needles to inject yourself. You get food delivered every day. You get clothing. It's not the way any of us would want to live, but unless we disperse the problem, the resources, we're never going to get rid of it.
Thank you. Next up will be candidate Miranda.
I think what Senator Wilkerson was saying is that we both live within walking distance of the issue, and we've been living with it for well over 8 years. And it's not just at Mass and Cass. It's on Blue Hill Ave. It's on Dudley Street. It's in Nubian Square. And frankly, this community was chosen because it was a poorer community. And you're right to say that there are 4 methadone clinics, and there's lots of resources at the corner of Mass and Cass that these people are traveling not only from all across the state, but all across the country. The 3 things that I would do and continue to do is, 1, this needs to be a regional statewide issue. The responsibility for caring for the people that are returning back to society, that are addicted or are mentally ill or underhoused, is all of our responsibility. Even though that people don't look to them as they're favorable, they're still our brothers and sisters on that corner. And many of them are now Black and brown, where it started off 8 years ago with a lot of young white people. Now we're seeing lots of Black and brown men and women in that area. I would transform too the shelter system. We have to have low threshold housing, not all concentrated in Roxbury and Dorchester and Mattapan. It needs to be in West Roxbury. It needs to be in Beacon Hill. It needs to be in Medford. It needs to be in other places. And right now, our shelter system is not a place that folks are going to. Third, I'd bring back communities of color into the conversation. I've been part of most of the meetings over the last couple of years, and it's been driven by the South End, and Roxbury's been largely out of the conversation. So those are 3 things that I would put on the table immediately.
Thank you very much. Next up, candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew. Over the course of my work in the community and in the church, I've comforted many families touched by drug abuse and helped their loved ones on the road to recovery. I am intimately familiar with the costs and consequences, and I fought with the bureaucracy to get people into treatment and on the path to healing. There is no single or simple solution, but I believe the continuum of care model that provides comprehensive drug abuse recovery, mental health, housing, education, job training, and placement counseling is the only proven solution to healing those that are struggling and to turn the community into a healing space. I believe that the cost, like everyone has said, the cost should be borne not just by Boston. I believe that Boston alone is bearing the brunt right now, but I also believe that every state whose citizens are coming to Mass and Cass, every city whose citizens are coming to Mass and Cass, I think they should share in the burden to help finance a program like the Continuum of Care. That model has proven to be a successful one. I think as state senator, I would set up a program, put funding in a model like Continuum of Care so that we can begin to heal this community. And I think it's a regional problem, not a Boston problem, that everyone should participate in.
Thank you. And last up on this one, candidate Eligardo.
We have to recognize the three parts that the models that have been working have identified. So housing first, and then wraparound healthcare services and coordination, whether that's coordination in a neighborhood, at the city level, or across the state. So housing first means taking the people off the street. They may be ready for treatment and go into treatment programs. They may not be ready for treatment and then they go into housing. And in that housing, they need to have wraparound services. We've set up a model like that at the Envision Hotel in my district. And because the coordination with neighbors, neighborhood associations, and Main Street's businesses was strong, we went from having a disaster initially where we were finding literally needles in the gas station inside of the convenience stores to having community members recognize the residents of that hotel as residents of our community. Now, what's really important about that is the compassion has to extend not only to the people struggling with substance use disorder and building understanding and care, but also to the residents that are experiencing the difficulties and the challenges as a result of that. And what that means is that we have to listen to each other. Now, there's plenty of money that's been thrown at this, and we got to get this economic development package done too to get the rest of that money out that we're working on right now in informal session. But we don't have a plan. And so if we take the models that have been working and extend them across the city and work with other regions to do the same, we can get this problem solved.
Thank you very much. Fatima?
Honorable, could I please have the next question in the chat? Can you unmute yourself, chat room moderator?
Sorry. So the question is,
Thank you.
we are still talking about housing insecurity, underperforming schools, inadequate and disparities in housing, education, healthcare, and economic stability. Why do you believe the community does not reflect billions invested in those areas?
Okay. And first up to respond to that is going to be candidate Miranda.
What's interesting is I grew up in the Dudley Triangle, part of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, living on a land trust. There was a lot of resident-led leadership, and one of the things that I think has been a huge problem, we went from severe disinvestment, the failed urban renewal projects in many of our neighborhoods, and then we went right into sort of looking at communities that were facing severe gentrification and continued disinvestment. I believe the power is in the people. If you engage people and listen to people who live in communities, they know what they need, they know what they deserve, and they can work together to help the city and elected state officials know to help the, excuse my language, the city and elected state officials can help usher in what the community desires by them being engaged, not only in community on the grassroots level, but also the state level. The other piece is that we've never gotten our fair share. There's $49 billion in our budget. We have tried to get a lot of money back into our communities, but that hasn't been the case. There's still a lot more money at the state level that needs to be equitably distributed into communities of color and communities that have lower incomes. And I think that also the last thing I would do is focusing, we need rent stabilization. The rent's too high. And we know that people are really drowning in the fact that they are forced to pay $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 while they're making less than $50,000 a year. They can't survive.
Thank you. Next up will be candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew. And thank you for that question, because I think that question goes to the heart of this race. I believe that the reason why we don't get the funding to our community is because it takes political will. It takes someone that's going to go to the state Senate and fight to bring the resources to the community that we see spread out around the state. I mean, look, we're not at the table, but we're on the table. And I think we need a state senator that's going to be at the table and not have our community be on the table. I believe that if I go to the state Senate to fight to bring resources, I believe you create legislation. I believe you take a program just like the Section 8 program, where our people in the community don't understand that they can take a Section 8, that they can use that to buy a home. I think you craft legislation that you set up, because one of the challenges with the Section 8 home buying program would be deposits. I think as state senator, you set up a program, you put funding in that program that allow folks to get deposits, grant deposits, give them a grant, allow them to go to the bank. Banks love Section 8. Allow them to buy a home, take a 3-family home, take 3 tenants with Section 8. They can buy a 3-family home, give them that grant deposit money, let them go buy a 3-family. I believe that it takes a political will and someone that's going to go to fight to bring the money to our district.
Thank you very much. Next up will be candidate Edgardo.
Sonia, what I love about this question is that it gets to the heart of the system problem. Because you're saying, what happens when we put billions? The budget's actually up to 52 billion now. And why don't we feel it even when we invest the money? Because money without a plan does not produce results. And a plan without an outcomes measurement and assessment and evaluation mechanism does not produce results. And this is how government has been working at the state level. And I studied legislative evidence-based legislation, and I've been an evaluator for over 20 years. And do you know we were able to do those trainings in 50 countries and no American legislator would take them up. So I said, I'll just become one, okay? And so first of all, we need to measure what we're doing. And Liz is right. It matters not just that you have a plan, but whose voice goes into drafting the plan and determining what the outcome should even be, so that we can have a course correction. Now, in addition to that, in places like education, in housing, and in transportation, we've had dramatic underinvestment. And like I've said to the governor many times in writing into his face, because I grew up with evictions and addictions, and so I know if you pay half of your electricity bill, you get none of your electricity. And so very often we underinvest and we say because we increase something by $1 million, then that's good enough. We need to know how much things cost and invest what they cost.
Thank you very much. Last up on this question, candidate Wilkerson.
I believe the question was why all of the same issues that we've been dealing with, we still have them. And I could not think of a more appropriate question for the night. Here's the reality. Massachusetts right now has more money than we've ever had in the history of the Commonwealth. The same is the same reality as I think candidate Culpepper talked about. So at some point you have to talk about accountability and what happens on your watch. And here's what I know. Every health indicator that we had that we were already suffering with got worse in the last 3 or 4 years. We lost life expectancy. We had more people die in the city of Boston, more Black and Latino people than any other population, and more Black people than any other category. We lost home ownership. We weren't doing well at the beginning. When you look at the budgets, I look at Medco, right? We were at the height of Medco when I left the Senate in 2008. The budget has been going backwards ever since. That's not the way this is supposed to be working. So it must speak to the issue of accountability. That's what I look at the elected officials who are talking about what they would do if they got there. You're already there. The fact is we didn't get any money. We got hardly nothing from even the Care and Recovery Act. That's what I do, and that's what I know. So $250 million for community reinvestment, $6.2 billion for community investment in insurance. I did that 20 years ago. I know how to do it.
Very good, thank you. I guess I could probably kick this over to our chat moderator. Do we have another question in the chat?
We do.
I'm sorry, Fatima?
Yeah, just one thing. Though I appreciate the information being placed in the chat for right now, could you please limit it to actual questions for the candidates so that the moderator doesn't have to comb through them all? Thank you. Go back to the chat room moderator.
Thank you. Okay, the question is, we are in a housing crisis, and in particular in access to affordable home ownership opportunities. Can I hear a bit about the specifics of plans to address this crisis urgently? Candidate Culpepper answered this.
Well, we'll still give candidate Culpepper a chance to take another bite at the apple, and coincidentally, he is up first on this one. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Matthew. Because housing has been my life's work. I worked on housing for my entire professional career. And I believe that housing is really the anchor for a family in our community. I think once housing is stabilized, and what I put forward is a gentrification stabilization plan, because I think we need to deal with what's happening with gentrification in our community. And without some kind of gentrification stabilization plan, people are moving from Boston to Taunton and Brockton because they don't have stabilized homes. I say take the housing that Boston Housing Authority oversees, federal and state subsidized. Take those that are forgotten, take that housing, rebuild it, renovate it, transfer ownership to the tenants, just like we did Academy Homes. It's working there. Put in a good management company. We trained the tenants. The tenants at Franklin Field, Brownlee Heath is Mildred Haley now, but if you remember, that was the only tenant-owned public housing in the country before the Boston Housing Authority took it back. So I think you look at what we have now. I think you stabilize the housing that they have now. They're taking the public housing, giving it to developers. Developers are renovating it. And at some point, we're gonna see that public housing is no longer gonna exist.
Thank you very much. Next up, candidate El Ugardo.
Thank you. So there are 4 components I've been working hard on in the legislature, and we need all 4. So one, people are keyed in on, that's we need revenue, but you can't cash your way out of this problem any more than most people can pay full down cash to buy a house. So number 2 is we need equitable supply. We need ways to finance that supply. And equitable means that we're not just making zoning easier and anti-racist, which Senator Edwards and others have been working on and really pushing that at the state level, but we're also making sure that the housing is being developed where the housing burden is. That means we make maps, folks, and that's what I've been doing and I've shared, I've done it for all 200 districts, the 40 Senate and the 160 reps. I'm on the housing committee and we've been able to pass some things on the third thing, which is expanding our conception of public housing and how to get access to publicly owned land. We've been trying to cash our way out of this when we have over $8 billion of land that's available, at least $1 billion of which can be used to generate cash or capital or land for publicly owned housing. I myself grew up with housing instability. And so I came to Boston 31 years ago with that primary on my mind. I've worked in homelessness. I've run a couple of statewide programs, including one in foreclosure prevention that ended up getting codified and is now what you use in your banks. That type of innovation is necessary, but we need a planner, we need an evaluator, and I am there for you on this and have already passed bills that will continue on the Senate.
Thank you. Next up, candidate Wilkerson.
2 things that I think we have to do in order to address the issue of housing. First is to acknowledge and redress the most violent and pernicious decision by the city of Boston in the late 60s and early 70s to completely raze 5,000 Black homeowners' property in the middle of Roxbury and Dorchester and never compensate them for it. That's why I'm excited about both the timing, because for the first time, Massachusetts has money and our intention is to go get it and to make them pay, because Massachusetts state legislature was also a contributor to that decision by capitalizing the very bank that was providing the mortgages for the redlining. Second is a philosophy change. And by that, I mean this. We keep talking about addressing housing by building housing for poor people instead of building up people so they're not poor. And that's a very different model. It's one that requires us to be focusing on how we make sure that city, state dollars are spent but for the very people who have to pay into it. You are going to love the economic plan that we introduced on Monday because it addresses all of that and puts us in a place where we begin a real wealth building, wealth creation model based on real estate ownership.
Great. Thank you very much. And last on this question is candidate Miranda.
we have to do everything on housing. You know, it's an incredibly important issue, and it's the #1 issue that we hear, whether you're in Hyde Park or you're in the South End or the Fenway. Folks are feeling the pressure, not only as renters, but as folks who own homes. First, I think we need to reform what we actually think is area median income. When you have Mattapan residents making less than $44,000 a year, and you have the area median income, including Brookline and other communities, it's not the same as Beacon Hill. And so we need to make sure that the affordable housing is actually affordable. Second, programs like what Maha is trying to do with their stash program, we need down payment assistance. Most people that want to buy a home in Boston cannot afford to do so because they do not have the savings to do so. And so raising it from $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 would be a great first step. Third, a lot of eviction and foreclosure diversion programs. I see a lot of seniors who retired a long time ago, but still need to work really to afford their homes, but they have a fixed income. They're on Social Security or disability, but they still have to pay their bills because they did not pay off their mortgages. And so I think those 3 first steps will be incredibly important because people love this community. They want to stay here. They don't want to live in Fall River and Taunton, but they feel forced to do so to be able to live. Not being able to pay more than 50% of your income on your housing is an important quality of life.
Thank you. Fatima?
That ding is in my head, sorry.
Okay. Understood. Moderator, can I have the next question, please?
Sure. What is your response to the state's plan to tear down the Shattuck Hospital and build an addiction treatment campus in that location?
Great question. And first up on this one will be candidate Elugardo.
So Shattuck, for probably most people on the call know, it sits inside of the green space over on Emerald Necklace. And I was just in conversations today with letters exchanged between about 5 community groups, a couple of city councilors, the commissioner over at DCAM, as well as Emerald Necklace themselves. It's not in my district yet, but because I represent part of JP, I've kept my eye on this. I think it's really important to put people first and to make sure that we're protecting green space. And the space is large enough to do both. My primary objective of someone learning this district, which this will be new for both the rep and the senator because of the redistricting and how it's been done, is going to be to make sure that hearing from the abutters and the community members that live there first is front and center. But what I heard today is they don't want any delay. They want this project to move forward. I actually thought maybe if we take a little bit more time, we can find a stronger compromise. But the answer to that was a resounding no. And so, as I always do, I will go with what the community says and support efforts to build and to make sure that the folks that are moving in are coming from the folks that have been moved out so that we're not increasing displacement and creating another little mass and cast over in Shattuck.
Great. Next up, candidate Wilkerson.
One of the things that we were able to do in the Senate when I was there last is to change a policy language with the Department of Public Health that sounded very innocent at first, but the implications were great. And that is this. We changed the language that required the Department of Public Health to spend monies for substance abuse and addiction, HIV/AIDS, in appropriate with the incidents in the neighborhood. What that meant is that if we had 28% of the population that was suffering, we got 28% of the money. Right now, there's no connection. And what happens is we have billions or hundreds of millions of dollars for opiate addiction, and the community that's suffering the greatest gets nothing, little or nothing, because those connections aren't made. That is the power of the thing you can do as a state legislature, certainly a state senator. And like I said, I know because we did that. And I think one of the things that people will tell you is that what communities want and what government is doing is totally disconnected. We see it in not only the Malcolm X Park, we see it in Crane Ledge, we see it in the Boston State Hospital site. We have to empower. Everybody's talking about empowering residents. They don't feel empowered right now. They feel like the city process and the state process is running over them. And it is the direct responsibility of the legislatures to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you. Next up, candidate Miranda.
You know, interestingly, I've also been in these conversations. So there's a Franklin Park plan that was put into by the BPDA that excluded the 13 acres that the Shattuck sits on. For folks that don't know, the Shattuck was also utilized for housing, for low threshold housing for folks at Mass and Cass. It is also the primary caregiver of not only folks that are dealing with addiction and mental health, but for the Department of Correction here in the Commonwealth. I too was really shocked that the DCAM and our state partners would not allow for the RFP period to be extended. And this is one of the problems. You set an arbitrary date, I think it's August 18th when the RFP is due, and you expect folks to respond to that RFP. And in many cases, 1 to 2 people are responding to $1 billion or multi-million-dollar investment opportunity because those are the only people who can. I think that they should pause. I think they should give 60 to 120 days for us to get the people in Roxbury and Mattapan and Dorchester to respond. Largely, most of the things that have been happening in Franklin Park have been led by our neighbors in Jamaica Plain, and they have different classes, different races. And so for the folks that are living on the other side of Blue Hill Ave, they largely don't know what's even happening at the Shattuck site and with Franklin Park. So my hope is that we actually can put a lot more pressure together to actually pause the development that is happening at the Shattuck. Will happen at the Shattuck, sorry.
Very good. And last up, candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew. I think that's a great question. And I agree with Representative Miranda. I think we need to pause that because if you really think about the purpose of it, many, many years ago, that land was given from the city to the Commonwealth to build a hospital. I think what's happened is they've seen that that hospital has now come to the end of its useful life. But I also think there's a process that did not include what I would call community consultation. I think when there's a development that's coming to the community, and by the way, I live on Seaver Street, right across the street from Franklin Park. So when I walk through the park, I see the Shattuck Hospital. And I think that community consultation process that should be in place, I think as state senator, I would put a community consultation process in place when there are developments coming to the community to affect our community. The thing about this proposal is that they've hired an outside developer. They want to push through with this program. And I think that when we bring projects like this development to the community, I think we need to have community developers, because I think when you bring in outside developers, they don't have the same sensitivity to the community that community developers do. So I agree with Representative Miranda. I think we need to pause it. I think we need to hold it. And I think it's something that the governor should do, and I think he should do it now.
Excellent. Fatima?
Okay. How are we doing on the questions, chat moderator?
We have a few in the chat. So one of the questions is here, I would like to hear more about what each of you see as the health inequities in the Black and Brown communities and how you would address these inequities. Please address physical, medical, mental, emotional health issues. Thank you.
Great. And first up will be candidate Wilkerson.
So I had the honor and privilege of introducing the first statewide commission to study and eliminate racial and ethnic health disparities in 2005. And in fact, the creation of the Health Equity Institute in the Commonwealth was born out of that legislative finding. The sad reality is that it is sat pretty much moribund and not much is happening. And not much is happening at a time when it is so critical. So here's what I can tell you. From 2019 to 2022, Black men in our community life expectancy, 62 years of age to 59. We lost 3 years of life expectancy. More Black people died. We're the only sector of people who died at a rate disproportionate to our very presence in the city. We're 24% of the population, 32% of the deaths. Asthma, diabetes, all went through the roof. Those social determinants are based in poverty, lack of food access. And again, I implore you to read the reset, Black Boston reset plan that I introduced, because it addresses all of them. Specifically, who must be involved is our hospitals. Why? Because as a part of the Affordable Care Act, they are obliged to spend 3% of their annual revenue in granting to community purposes. If you look at the reports that are filed with the AG as to what they spend it on, you'll be shocked, because it has nothing to do with bettering health.
Okay, thank you. Next up will be candidate Miranda.
I spent a lot of time in this issue, although I didn't work in public health before I got to the State House. I quickly understood that if I wanted to end gun violence, like the one that took my brother's life, that I would have to address the social determinants of folks' health. We're not well in our communities. And so there are 3 things that I really want to work on and continue to work on in the Senate that I've already started to work on as a rep. 1, maternal health, maternal morbidity, and the loss of our children, which is 6 to 8 times white women in the Commonwealth and 2 times for Black women versus white women in the Commonwealth. It is a shame in the national leader with the best hospitals, best colleges, and the best public health infrastructure, arguably, that we are dying and our children are dying. 2, gun violence prevention. We can do something about this. The Blue Hill Ave corridor is the most policed, over-incarcerated, and still not safe district in the Commonwealth. We have more non-fatal and fatal shootings and stabbings than anywhere else in the Commonwealth. If we alleviate poverty, if we work to alleviate poverty, increase opportunity, fund gun violence prevention like we fund public safety, there's a huge myth that if we have more police, that we're safer. That is not true. What we need is like another Mattapan Boys and Girls Club. We need another Mildred and Gallivan Community Center, because our young people are really struggling. I introduced a bill at the State House for mental health first aid. We need to have mental health triage and healing-centered work everywhere, whether it's a bodega, a church, or out of school time facility. Folks need help when they're in distress immediately, and I hope to pass that bill when I get on the other side to refile it.
Thank you. Next up will be candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew. I believe that everyone should have adequate health insurance. One of the first things that I would do as state senator is file a bill to change mass health. When you look at mass health and you look at many folks that have, for instance, Aetna, you'll see gross disparities in what they'll cover. And I believe that we need a mass health plan for the residents in this state that's equivalent to an Aetna plan, so that when you do go to a hospital, when you do go to a health clinic, that it will be covered, and it won't be an issue of whether or not you have to make a choice of what you can pay for. We're in a mental health crisis in our community. I see it in the church. I see folks coming to the church for help. And one of the things that I think we have to do when you look at the mental health issue, I think whoever asked that question, and thank you for that question. I think as state senator, I can create a budget, create a program where we expand mental health to our community health centers. They're right down the street. And there's no reason why we can't add more funding to those clinics, whether it's Whittier Street, whether it's Mount Bolden Health Clinic, whether it's Harvard Clinic, whatever clinic it is, that we can add more funding to it so that it would encompass mental health issues, and they'll have the capacity right in their mental health center. We can do it. And I think we either pay now or we pay later. Thank you for that question.
Thank you very much. Last up on this will be candidate Eligardo.
I've been working on this from a systemic standpoint and trying to help us not only to look at the symptoms, but what is causing this. And we start with the mindset, I call it societal child abuse, because if in wealthy white neighborhoods like Newton, children have incredible mental health breakdowns, if they started to pick up guns and drugs, people ask, what's happening to our children? and who's doing it and what can we do about it? That's the same question that we need to be asking in our cities with Black and Brown families. And so I did run a research group, and we looked at racism in health, and particularly in behavioral health. So we have to address the stigma that we have in our own communities, but we also have to address the access to healthcare providers that look like us, so that people will utilize the healthcare that we do have. There are people that come from other countries. I'm working on a bill right now with extensive medical training that they can't use here. So we need to fast track them. I've been working on parity between behavioral health funding and physical health funding. And that's something that we got done in the legislature in each of the last two sessions. And then our ecological health, making sure that our schools and our public buildings are safe. And so I've gotten some legislation passed and some money as well. In fact, right before I was invited to be on Ways and Means, we got millions into the budget for public housing, health issues, particularly child behavioral health. And I was invited to file a $1 million amendment for myself, which we did. And we'll continue that work for the whole district.
Very good. Fatima?
Thank you. How are we doing on the questions, moderator?
We have a few. The next question is, what is your plan to be accessible to constituents, the community outreach beyond the campaign?
It's a great question. First up on that one will be candidate Miranda.
I'm incredibly accessible. I think that's one of my gifts, that I meet people where they're at. Folks can DM me, inbox me, text my staff. I also hold coffee hours and legislative briefings throughout my time. I've done that in the House and continue to do so. I think two unique things that I was not able to do while in the House that I'd love to bring to the Senate is that the Black community gets its information differently. And so whether it's a podcast or a television show on BNN, I think those two options would also increase sort of engagement with community beyond newsletters that you send over email or print. Additionally, I think another piece of text messaging is a very powerful tool, and there's a lot of apps that increase engagement, participatory democracy engagement among your constituents by using their cell phones. And I'd love to increase that if I'm so lucky to make it to the Senate.
Very good. Thank you very much. Next up on that will be candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew. One of the things that I've seen that's interesting while I've been campaigning is the need to have a constituent service office and a constituent outreach officer. When I was chief of staff of a Congresswoman on Capitol Hill, we had a constituent outreach officer and a constituent service office. And one of the things that they did was their role was to fill the requests that came into the office from the constituents. What I found since I've been running is that's exactly what we need. In fact, I've had some of the residents asking for help on just speed bumps in the neighborhood. I've had residents help me and asking to get trees cut down that have fallen in the neighborhood. And in fact, one of the things that's happened since I've been running is I've become familiar in a way that I hadn't expected to with Joshua Franklin Hodge. He's the chief of streets. And I've had to refer different people to Joshua Hodge because they had street issue. Also, Brad Garrett is an interim transportation commissioner. I've had to deal with transportation issues. So I've become familiar just running on what we need in terms of constituent outreach. I will have an open door policy, just like I had at HUD. Walk into my office and your need will be dealt with. I think the constituents deserve it, and I believe that they need it, and I'm ready to provide it on day one.
Thank you. Next up will be candidate Eligardo.
This is my bread and butter because I come from a combination of organizing backgrounds, grassroots organizing, and then also, at MIT and Harvard, after growing up street with my dad, learned all kinds of other mechanisms and tools for helping communities to come together, which I've trained people on all around the world and all around Boston, all up Blue Hill Ave, in fact, and Dudley Street. And what that's looked like in my little district, and why I need a bigger district, y'all, is making sure that I am present where you're at and not just asking you to come where I am. I'm not as good on social media. So that's going to have to be my team running that. But where I'm very good is showing up at your meetings, listening, and helping you meet the people you need to know to multiply your power. So what that looks like is we have, so like the Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council is great because you already bring together dozens of little neighborhood groups, but we need to build that type of power across the whole district of the Second Suffolk. And I'm really looking forward to working with the delegations. That's a strategy I've used to get bills passed, to get money into my district, where you say, okay, is it Boston delegation? Is it the Second Suffolk delegation? So that we're swirling around the State House as one powerful voice. And so that's actually really critical to all of the pieces of what I want to get done. And I'm really looking forward to showing our city what we can do.
Great stuff. Thank you. And last up on this one is candidate Wilkerson.
One of the most important things or challenges for elected officials is transmitting important information to constituents in a timely fashion. And there are many different ways to do it. And it's always a challenge because people sometimes think you walk into the radio station and said, I need to talk to my people. And that's just not how it works. But I will say that the last 3 years have been very informative. And one of the things that I think is important is that, you know, when you're sitting in the space of an elected official, you don't talk about it as if you're new. The reality is that we've been through hell in this last 3 years. I started the Boston Black COVID-19 Coalition because we did not have a voice and responsive voice in legislature that would respond to us. And I know people are going to tell you about all the, you know, the food boxes they've passed out. The responsibility of elected officials during the COVID-19 is to get resources to the people on the ground. The reality is for us is that if you got your vaccine in Mattapan, Dorchester, Grove Hall, the likelihood is that the Black Boston Coalition, that big green and black van that you see driving around, which was in Cleary Square on Wednesdays, Mattapan on Fridays, Washington Park Mall on Tuesdays, is there because we had to go out and raise our own money, which seems very strange given that we had $142 billion in various COVID-related resources. That's the job. We had, in addition to the district office, we had quarterly meetings all over the district. I have not seen one. We met.
Thank you very much. Fatima?
Okay. But before I continue, though I am very appreciative and love reading all of the plugs for every candidate, I enjoy that, but it is very distracting for the moderator to have to go through to find the actual questions. If on the GMNC website itself, we do have all candidates' websites. If after at the end of the forum, if people would like to post the website or contact information, they're more than welcome. But just during this forum, if it would please take a pause on that, it'd be much appreciated. All right, that's all I'm asking. Okay, the chat room moderator, if you can find the next question, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome, sure. What plans do you have to stop Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, Hyde Park, and especially Mattapan from paying the most for home and motor vehicle insurance in the state of Mass?
Great. First up on this one will be candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew. And thank you for that question, Madam Moderator, because I think it's a critical issue. I think when you look at our community, I think you look at our insurance, I think you look at our taxes. Our taxes, in fact, they go up without any notice. We don't even know when our taxes go up in the city. When you look at the taxes around the state, you compare them to the taxes in the city of Boston, we're paying more. When you look at what we pay for insurance, because it's in the city, we pay more for insurance. And when you really think about the excess funding that they have on the state level, I think it's time for some tax relief, state tax relief. I think there's been discussions on Beacon Hill about sending $500 to each resident. I think they take that money and they turn it into tax relief. And I think instead of our taxes going up, I think we need some tax rebates so that we can really begin to see the investment that we've been making in our community, in our state. It's time for tax rebate, tax relief. Instead of that $500 just going out to everyone, I think those of us that have been paying taxes for many years are at the point where we need some tax relief. As state senator, I will file the legislation to grant tax relief to the citizens in the 2nd Suffolk District. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Next up on that is candidate Eligardo.
Thank you. Well, since the good Reverend mentioned tax relief, I will plug that I have gotten my property tax freeze for elders bill through housing and to the floor, but not in time for a vote, which might be okay because the Republicans are now reviewing it to see if we can pass it on informal. So prayers up for our elders on property tax freezes. The question on insurance, I think it's on home and motor vehicle insurance. So we know that's tied to structural issues around safety. So number one, there's a lot of accidents, and the accidents in those neighborhoods are not a result of our people. They're a result of bad planning and bad development. And so we need a stronger plan. I know the mayor's working on safe streets right now, but it doesn't address some of the major corridors, just some of the side streets. And so we need street calming and traffic calming mechanisms everywhere. But it goes a little bit deep, a lot deeper than that actually, because right now it's community records. This should be tied to individual records so that the communities aren't paying for the behavior of people zooming through that don't even live there. Right. And then number three, there's underinvestment in the first place in those communities so that we can have safe streets and sidewalks and make sure that people can do what they need to do. I don't have time to go into Blue Hill Lab, but anyway, you all know where we're headed there. And data collection right now, it could be structurally racist because the companies collect this data and there aren't very many regulations around how they update it or whether they make sure that they're picking zip codes in a fair and just way. So a lot of technical things we can do to make this better.
Thank you very much. Next up, candidate Wilkerson.
So auto and home insurance, or the auto insurance in particular, are one of things I know a little bit about. My passion in the Senate, what I was able to do was to hold off the suburban communities from changing the law for 14 years, which they changed in 2008, actually end of 2008, right after I left. And here's the bottom line. It's not even so much about the streets. Our auto insurance is based on where and how often and the location of the accident. Boston is a population of 30,000 people every single day. Our population triples because of all the people who come here to live, work, play, travel, and they come here to have their accidents. And so our auto insurance is based on that reality. So there is no will in the suburban legislators to change it because they like it that way, which is why we created a fair plan. And that fair plan process completely blew up in 2009. We have to make the case. The reality is that I said my particular strength is making the case for fairness to people who don't necessarily have a nickel in the game. I was the only Black legislator for the entire 16 years I was there and got some of the most progressive legislation passed in the history of the Commonwealth, because I know how to get to 21 and I know how, based on facts, to make the case for fairness. This is two issues we have to do better, and I know I will.
Thank you. Thank you. And last up on this one, candidate Miranda.
The Black drivers aren't more dangerous, but we pay a lot more. In fact, Roxbury insurance rates are incredibly high. And this is an issue that I actually started to work with the state insurance regulatory body on, because there needs to be a metric where we're collecting the data of racism. This is a question that can be answered on the fact that Black people living in zip codes are paying more because of racism. It's discrimination. That's what it is. And I think introducing legislation, and the Senator Wilkerson said it, you have to have policy changes. You have to have legislation that curbs these practices. And also you have to have the data collection so we can solve the problem. If we don't measure something, it's very hard to figure out how to actually have the legislation and policy change to counteract the issue. I recently demanded a metric in the the insurance body was like, we don't have a metric. Well, how don't you have a metric? These folks are paying double and triple the amount of insurance that other folks are paying for the same vehicle or the same sort of homes, 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, or 1 bath. So I think those are the 3 solutions that I would work on first when I get in the Senate.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fatima.
Thank you. I think we have the time to switch on. Okay, comments. Chat room moderator, I think we're doing pretty good. You can ask the next question.
Sure. Now that the MBTA has shown they are unable to supply service for the masses on the orange and green lines, what would you do to maintain adequate maintenance for the entire system and why there's a lack of operators? They seem to be on a hiring campaign, but the response is not there. Why? Second part of the question is, what do you think of the City of Boston's plan to run a bus line down the middle of Blue Hill Avenue?
Okay, a lot to dive into there.
Matthew?
Good luck. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want a little more time?
Yeah, why don't you add another 30 seconds on it, because I
agree.
do it justice.
Very good. Okay, so just so everybody will be prepared for that, it will be 2 minutes to do justice to this question. And first up will be candidate El Ugardo.
Transportation revenue was one of my big projects in the first session. I had developed a relationship with the transportation chair, which is, by the way, one of the ways you get stuff done is you make sure that your neighborhood leaders are able to speak directly to the chairs of the committees that are making the decisions. And he really appreciated that, because the people in our neighborhoods are brilliant and they bring good ideas. And so I did some work with the community health centers around social determinants of health and how that affects transportation. And through that work, I spoke with leadership as part of several different caucuses and delegations that I'm in, so I got before them a few times. We were able to get a $1 billion revenue package passed. What I learned in that work, though, is that we've underinvested by up to $50 billion because it's been 2 decades of underinvestment in the MBTA, and it's compounded and compounded and compounded. Like I said about the electricity, you can't pay half your electricity bill. If you do that, you get none of the electricity. Well, we've been doing something similar, but it's become, as we know, very dangerous. And so we have to actually fund our way out of this situation. The Senate actually shut down that revenue bill. They shut it down based on some Republican talking points that I was there for, because the chair of the Black and Latino caucus asked me personally to talk to Senate President about it. And I heard her arguments. So we need some stronger pressure on that side to get the cash funding through. But we've also got, almost $8 billion potentially of infrastructure funding above and beyond ARPA that's going to be coming through. So we have to keep thinking ahead about how we're going to cash in the bonds that are available so that we can get closer to full funding to make sure that our communities are covered. And then the third thing I've been working on is, where are the citations? Where do you cite this work? And so I'm really pleased that after some testimony I shared with the chair of bonding, she did agree to put in to our last bonding bill on transportation some protections to make sure that research was done on race equity and to make sure that citations happen in our neighborhoods of these funds.
Great, thank you. Next up, candidate Wilkerson.
I'm going to try to divide my time between the Blue Hill Avenue question, and transportation. So let me deal with the transportation first. The issue with the MBTA is complex, not complicated. Complex in that the focus of the hires and appointments of the staff who are running the MBTA for the last 3 or 4 years have been political appointments for people who have no idea what they're doing and don't have history in transportation. That's a fact. Remember the Beverly Johnson, who was a professional transportation professional, and she was fired by the Baker administration back in 2016 because she couldn't get 110 inches of snow off the track in a week. She looks like the princess to us right now, because we've seen a succession of incompetent professionals who have put our very lives at risk. The MBTA is not safe, and it's not because it's 200 years or whatever, or $1 million. That's some of it, but the new stuff doesn't even work, right? So let's be clear about that. I believe that the feds and the state should work with them to take over the operation, because I do not trust this current population. Second, and this is the segue, how are children going to get to school on the Orange Line, which is the most used railway system for Black and brown children, Black and Latino children in Roxbury, Dorchester? How do they get to school in September with the Orange Line shut down in 30 days? What's the plan? Because right now, the BPS is negotiating with the bus drivers union to reduce the routes. This is what I talk about when I talk about the disconnect between the communities. Second, to put rail down the middle of Blue Hill Avenue will be the final coffin in the total destruction of business along that route. The churches, the same churches who were run out of the South End because they didn't want them parking in the street anymore, will be leaving. It is a bad idea, and we cannot let it happen.
Okay, next up, candidate Miranda.
So things that I learned from, studying notes and Plan Mattapan and looking at the Blue Hill Ave Action Plan. I've been looking at it because I represent the latter end of Blue Hill Ave, so I care deeply about this issue. One of the things you'll notice if you learn anything about Mattapan is 1 in 5 people, or less than 1 in 5 people, are within 10 minutes of a rail stop. That is a problem. That's not equitable transportation. Most of the trips are bus trips. I've taken the 28 for most of my life, and I've taken the 45 also most of my life because I don't drive. And one of the most interesting things, it's not reliable. Thank God that Mayor Jamie and Mayor Wu made it affordable and accessible for folks to take, particularly those going to work and school. But still, Mattapan residents are spending 30 minutes to 45 minutes longer on their bus trips than any other resident of the city. So that needs to be addressed. But we need massive investment and massive revenue. We need the fair share amendment. We need to close corporate loopholes. There's offshore tax evasion. There's all these things happening where the money is not being utilized correctly and efficiently in the MBTA. The other piece is that we do have the Fairmont line. And the Fairmont line, although it's on Blue Hill Ave and doesn't cross all of Mattapan, unlike my district in Dorchester, what we know for sure is if we electrify the line, and then we make sure that it runs quicker, 20 to 25 minutes or even 15 minutes or less, like the orange and the red line go, then folks can be able to get to work and school on time. But the problem is now it runs every 45 minutes. Folks are not conditioned to utilize the line. So folks are taking 2 buses and a train. And then when the orange line and green line are down, they're going to be forced to take 3 buses or more. And so that's not equitable. So we need revenue. The Blue Hill Ave plan needs to be led by the people and not the city.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. And last up, candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew. And I believe we're dealing with a transportation justice issue. I think that when you look at the way the plan is beginning to develop for Blue Hill Avenue, I think it's a travesty of justice. We filed suits at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. I'm a professional in filing suits, and we're looking at what's happening with Blue Hill Avenue. I live on Seaver Street. And when I came out the door one day, I drove down Seaver Street, I didn't even realize that the street had changed. I didn't know which way to go. I didn't know whether to take a left or a right. When they put the bus station in, the bus station it's in the middle of the street. Seniors have to walk across the street to get to the bus. And I don't know who was thinking about developing that lane down Seaver Street, but they certainly weren't thinking about safety. The same thing with American Legion Highway. You drive down American Legion Highway, the bike lane is as big as the traffic lane. I have not seen one bike on American Legion Highway, but I've seen long lines of cars on a Saturday morning trying to go down American Legion Highway. I think if we don't stand and if we don't fight and if we don't put all of our energy to stop that lane from going down Blue Hill Avenue, shame on us. Because I think, like Diane said, it's going to be the end of our community. How can they put a bus lane down Blue Hill Avenue? Traffic is routed from the suburbs off of the expressway coming through Milton. I live on Seaver Street. I see it every day. If they put a bus lane down Blue Hill Avenue, folks will do what I do. I don't drive down Seaver Street to Columbus Avenue anymore. I take a right on Humboldt Avenue. They will not drive down Blue Hill Ave because the businesses will be the ones that lose, and we're ready to fight to make sure that that doesn't happen. As state senator.
Very good. Thank you. Fatima.
Okay, let's see. How are we doing on questions, moderator?
We have questions in the chat. The next one, home foreclosures are a major problem in the second Suffolk now. Many of these foreclosures are not only wrong, but illegally being processed by the mortgage companies without any help to the homeowners by the government, especially the Attorney General's office. What plans do you have to address the foreclosure issues in Massachusetts, especially since it's going to become a bigger issue when this market crashes in the near future?
Thank you. We'll be back to 1:30 for this one, Fatima.
Yes, thank you.
All righty, and first up will be candidate Wilkerson.
I think so many of our issues actually don't require new policy. It requires enforcement of the policies we already have. And I think actually the homeowner foreclosure issue is one. There's been a massive a body of nonprofits, organizations, community statewide orgs who have been working on this issue for probably 2 or 3 decades, and I think been very effective at putting policy on the books. What it takes is really, really, really a will. And that goes not only to the act of foreclosure, but to the process of holding the banks accountable for their actions. We've had, just in the last 3 or 4 years, any number of our major banks who have flunked their CRA requirements, which is the lending in our communities, the foreclosures. One comes to mind, the Santander Bank. And we've been quiet as a community. And so they continue to do what they've been doing. So I think as one of the most important things we can all do, is certainly not just the state legislators, but public citizens, is to fill out the applications for the CRA, fill out the opinions at the end of the year because they have value, and also to press and push to make sure that policy is followed and that our state banking commissioner does what they're supposed to do.
Thank you. Next up, candidate Miranda.
You know, one of the things is we should see housing as a right. You know, the Housing Bill of Rights are things that we not only need to continue working on, but it's an important piece. I see a lot of residents who come, they call my office like Housing Stability 2.0, because many folks, particularly that speak Cape Verdean Creole or Portuguese, will reach out to me regardless if they live in Roxbury and Dorchester. We don't have the multilingual services and access to foreclosure diversion programming in our communities where folks need it the most. And so that's an important step. The other thing that I would create is we need to stop these mortgage companies that are doing predatory lending in the Commonwealth. There are a lot more of them that we actually think. It's not just federal companies, it's not just Wells Fargo. But when you're talking about banks and mortgage companies that are located right here in Massachusetts that are lending to families that cannot afford the mortgages, the adjustable rate mortgages that they have to pay. And if we all remember what happened in 2008, there's continuing of prime mortgages in our company, in our city. For example, I have a street that was all foreclosed on off of Bowdoin in Geneva once that crisis happened. Now, I was not at the time an elected official, but I was a community member. And thankfully, there were organizations like Nuestra Comunidad and Dorchester Bay that was doing some of that foreclosure diversion program. So I sent many of the residents there as a nonprofit leader. So those are the things that I would work on in the Senate.
Thank you very much. Next up, candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew. And as state senator, I would file a foreclosure prevention bill. I think many folks during COVID that have lost their jobs or that have gone back to work, not at the same level that they were at before COVID, have found themselves in a foreclosure situation. And I think the state has the funding, the COVID money, to help folks that are dealing with foreclosure prevention. Another problem, though, is with reverse mortgages. At HUD, we called it the HECM, where seniors are getting a reverse mortgage. When they pass on, those children that are left are required to pay that mortgage off. So I think we have to deal with reverse mortgages. I think we have, because it becomes a foreclosure issues, the banks step in and the banks foreclose on the home because the children don't have the cash readily available to pay off that mortgage that their parents added to increase their funding. So I think when you look at where we are, I think we need a foreclosure prevention bill. I think there's a funding at the State House. As State Senator, one of the things I would do is file a foreclosure prevention bill because folks need help. I will also file what we call on the federal level an affirmative furthering fair housing. And that's a bill that worked across the state. The Trump administration came and repealed it. I'll talk about that on our next segment.
Thank you. And last up on this will be candidate Eligardo.
Yes, so first there's some low-hanging fruit, and we need to make sure that foreclosures don't affect your credit so that it turns into a compounding problem. We have legislation that just keeps getting a little bit ignored. I'd like to bring a highlight to that next time. My first job out of college back in the mid-90s was running the groundbreaking at that time foreclosure prevention project statewide. And so they did have me write the congressional testimony that actually resulted in the codified rules that Senator Wilkerson is right, we don't enforce. Now, it's not so much the banks these days. A lot of banks have really stepped up on recognizing that nobody's willing to pay more for a house than the person that's living in it. So it's a win-win to prevent the foreclosure, but it's these mortgage companies that are out of control. And so we need a separate source of financing. We need a public bank. I am the filer of the public bank bill. We need revenue. I'm the filer of the HERO bill, which there is no climate justice without housing justice. It raises $300 million, half for each, and part of that can go to providing assistance to make sure that people stay in their home. I agree with Senator Wilkerson. This isn't rocket science. We've already figured this one out. We have to do what we already know. And that's something that I've been pushing on and will continue to do on the Senate with a bigger bully pulpit. And I hope to see some real change now that people are feeling the pressure. Even in the middle classes, we're getting more done.
Excellent. Fatima?
As there is, we have just 4 more minutes left in the chat. I'm going to ask one question that was, if you don't mind, moderator, is that okay?
That is fine.
Okay, thank you. You've done a wonderful job this evening, by the way. Thank you
so much.
I'm going to ask the last question that wasn't asked, that's the person asked it hasn't asked before. How do you plan, this is to everyone, how do you plan on addressing the climate concerns today and into the future if we don't lessen the single occupancy vehicles all along Blue Hill Avenue? And Matthew, who would go first?
It'll be candidate Miranda first. And how much time on the clock, Fatima?
Let's change it up. 45 seconds, because y'all can be on your toes.
Oh boy. Okay. All right. Here we go. I gotta.
That's okay.
Okay, here we go.
I know it's good. Y'all are excellent. Go ahead.
All right. Candidate Miranda, you are up.
I grew up in the EJ community. One of the first things I did was working with Representative Madaro and Dubois to codify EJ into law, to give back the power to communities to fight back. I walk Blue Hill Ave and I try to walk it all the way through, and it's not safe. We live on a urban heat island. We need more trees. We need to make sure that our pathways are safe for the folks that are differently abled and those that are walking. We need to make sure that the vacant lots that were cleaned up for open streets are actually cleaned up and safe, and blight is removed from Blue Hill Avenue. And it's important to encourage and educate folks to take public transportation, but also to improve biking along Blue Hill Ave. But folks will not bike down Blue Hill Ave if it's not safe. They won't walk down Blue Hill Ave if it's not safe.
Very good. Thank you. Next up, candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew. I think with housing being one of our major issue, I think the climate crisis that we're in is proportions that we need to act now. I think one of the things that I've done is I have a climate justice policy, justice for everyone. There are 3 components to that policy real quick, that we hold those that are causing the issue accountable. Number 2, that we begin to transition. I agree with Representative Miranda. When you think about our community, you think about just what we use to pave the streets. We are living in a heat box. The final thing is that we need to develop private partnerships to begin to develop the climate change policies that we need.
Very good, thank you. Next up, candidate Eligardo.
Well, we do need to think about climate response holistically and educate our communities, as I was doing before I came, so that community-based research went into public housing and trained youth to train and elders to teach the community of the impacts of climate on us right here in the city when things get hot, when things get flooded, when our elders and our children are suffering from asthma. So that requires adaptation. It requires conservation. We got to use less and restoration. So sorry to say, guys, I don't agree with everybody on this one. We do have to have less single occupancy vehicles, as the question said. So that means we got to have more bus lanes and more buses. And that's going to cause traffic issues.
Okay, thank you. And last up on this question, candidate Wilkerson.
I'm going to actually turn this. The only way that this is going to work is it's going to require all of us and all of you, bodies, voices. So let me start with brownfields, which is a direct issue for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If in fact we don't change our policy that requires developers who want to develop land to remedy the brownfields, and if they don't do it, the community just sits in the brownfield. Why is this an issue? Because we have more brownfield properties than anyone else, killing us until one day somebody gets some money. That's just wrong. It shouldn't be that way. Second, city level. We have to make sure that our actual policy is connected to the actions of the city of Boston. We're talking about environmental justice.
Short time on that one. All right, Fatima.
All right, we're gonna wrap up. Since I didn't ask a question, I'm gonna ask one, and then everyone's gonna get a minute and a half to close. And yes, I do realize Matthew is 8 o'clock. My one, you get to say yes or no. And Matthew's gonna laugh when I say this question. So a little while ago, I was asked to do an op-ed piece about the idea of putting in all public schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, within physical education classes, teaching children how to ride bicycles. If we're going to go implement bike lanes, you do need to have children from the age of kindergarten on up be educated to know how to read directions, how to follow signs, how to be safe. Through physical education, because we have one of the worst systems of physical education, quite frankly, in the state. So yes or no, would you support the funding to require both public and private funding of this effort? Matthew, who's first?
Okay, so we got a minute and a half on the clock.
No, this is yes or no. This ain't.
Oh, sorry, yes or no. Sorry. Okay.
Who's yes or no first?
So first up on this one, I got my things out of order here. Candidate Miranda.
Yes, physical movement is important.
Thank you.
Next candidate Wilkerson.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Next candidate Eligardo.
Yes, I've actually already been working on walk and rolls and teaching kids.
Just yes. Yes or no. That's it.
Yes.
And last but not least,
candidate Culpepper.
Senor.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. I'm so glad I have Senator Bethel to get them all in agreement. So who gets to go first on the wrap-up statements?
Okay, we're gonna go in the opposite order that we did for the opening statements.
Okay.
And you said it's a minute 30, correct?
Yep, sure.
So this one we're gonna lead off with candidate Wilkerson.
Is it candidate Wilkerson or candidate Miranda?
Oh, did I have the
You
I
started
thought I
first
did.
with Culpepper, Elgato, Wilkerson, and then Miranda was last.
Okay. Sorry about that. I had those two mixed up. I'm
No
working with
problem.
my little pieces of post-it
Uh,
note. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So candidate Miranda will lead off.
Thank you all for a great evening. Thank you to all the candidates. I have a deep amount of appreciation and love for you all. I hope to earn the vote of the people of the Second Suffolk. I have deep roots in the last 3.5 years that I've been at the State House. I've delivered with my colleagues and with the communities that I represented to pass much needed environmental justice legislation, police reform, maternal and birthing justice legislation, and also jail-based voting to ensure that we continue to enfranchise and give access to the ballot for our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated. I oftentimes say to folks that with the vote to me, you don't have to just have a legislative champion or a progressive champion, but someone who's also at our heart and at our core, a grassroots organizer. I show up when it matters. I care about the issues that keep people up at night. And I want to continue to do that work in the Senate. Being a leader is a great responsibility and privilege, and it is one that has to be centered on love for community, getting things done, but also listening and working in coalition to ensure that we get not only the right policy changes and legislation to make people's lives better, but that every day we're empowering people to help participate and continue to participate in our democracy. So thank you for a great evening. I've put my information in the chat, and I look forward to continuing to talk to people in the street, on the streets of Mattapan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we'll go to candidate Wilkerson.
I'd like to think that there's a reason why we're getting such incredibly warm responses from people in Mattapan and Hyde Park and Dorchester, Roxbury, Mission Hill, as we're knocking. Number one, because they remember me, which makes a difference. Second, they remember my work. And that work runs deep. That work runs before the legislature, before my time in the Senate. It runs during that time in the Senate. Wrongful conviction compensation bill, the only state in the nation with CRA insurance, racial gender profiling data collection bill, the public construction reform. Spent the last 4 years making sure that our restaurants got business during COVID so that we wouldn't be lost. Fought to make sure that they got accommodation for licensing because they were expected to pay their licenses during COVID, although their businesses were shut. Raised $2.8 million to keep our people alive. The love is real. I love my community. There are two things that are the major responsibility for elected officials, and certainly it is both delivering the resources and writing policy that works. I happen to be damn good at both of those and want to continue to be able to bring that work without fear or favor on behalf of the residents of Mattapan, Dorchester, Hyde Park, a little bit of Roslindale, Jamaica Plain, and I hope I didn't forget anyone, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. I think that's everyone, but that is the point. It's about everyone. And there's clearly, you know, you're going to be represented by something who understands that and has delivered, will continue to deliver. Thank you.
Okay, and it looks like we went over time on our timer app, so
It disappeared.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. If you don't hear it, I will call it out. I'm still keeping the. Oh yeah, no, I can't start it back up. So I'll keep the time on my phone for these last two.
Got it.
90 seconds. Okay. Lima's got it. All right. So next up is candidate Elgato.
So it's not just that we show up. You're going to be blessed with people that show up, no matter how you vote here. It's how we show up and what we do when we get there. What kind of strategies have we employed? And how does that relate to 2022 and what's happening right now? Do we know how to evaluate? I have 20+ years as an evaluator, not only in community and economic development, but also on policy. We need to elevate our community's understanding of what it means to be not only an elected official, but to be somebody who's working in the community to make sure that our jobs are effective with you. I've been delivering leadership and outcomes my whole life. It hasn't been about me. It's been about others. Everything I've learned, everything I've done, everything I've worked on. Sorry, I got a timer here. I can't see it. Everything I've worked on has been about building the community. And this is why in our very community, Tito Jackson, Russell Holmes, Kim Janey, Mel King, the whole Arroyo family, Dr. Atia Martin, Jose Masso, Dr. Marcia Kim, and the list goes on, have endorsed me because they say and they know that I'm a collaboration maker. I'm a leader maker. I am a bridge builder. And that's why I already have strong relationships with chairs and rank and file in both the House and the Senate. Put me there. I've been working on all this stuff now, and I'm ready to do more for you.
That's perfect.
Might have helped if I was unmuted.
Thank you very much. And last up, candidate Culpepper.
Thank you, Matthew and Fatima and the Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Coalition for sponsoring, hosting, and putting this debate together. I've been leading in this community that I was born and raised in all of my life. The fight that we have now, whether it's gentrification, whether it's transportation, whether it's housing, whether it's healthcare, is not new. I've been fighting this battle all of my life. And when I think about leadership, when it came to COVID, who was the one that put together the COVID-19 Clergy Committee of Boston of 25 pastors to deal with testing, vaccination, and food? It was Minyard Culpepper. When it came to the housing issues, and there were housing issues, and the city of Boston and the Boston Housing Authority needed to be sued, who was it that they called on? It was Minyard Culpepper to file the suit against the city of Boston and the Boston Housing Authority for the discrimination in South Boston and in Charlestown. We were the first to create what we call the Civil Rights Protection Plan that protected tenants in the housing in the Boston Housing Authority, the Civil Rights Protection Plan that went national. When Charles Morrell was attacked by the white supremacists, who did they call? Minyard Culpepper.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that wraps it up, and we're a little bit over. I want to thank everyone for their time, and I'd like to thank the candidates especially for your wonderful answers. The fun. I'm glad you engaged well with everyone here. Thank you, audience, for your time. And all the supporters who are here. I did have to say, this is the first time that I've gone through and had to rename people because they all come up and you all shared all of your links and I was getting confused between the candidates' names and those people who are guests. So that's why sometimes they say guest applicant. Because
Fatima, there was a lot of great information in the chat today. If anyone wants to save that chat, you can